Finally, it's lovely to see you. Thank you for having me on your show.
Thank you for being here. What you went through is just beyond any comprehension.
It is the things that she put us through was really, really bad. You know, the punishments were terrible, and our bedroom doors at home, they were always bolted from the outside. They had great big, you know, those great big black industrial bolts were always put on the doors on the outside. And when we were put into our bedrooms at night time, there'd be a potty put in there, and we weren't allowed to make a sound. Even the windows would be nailed down shut, you know, the old things that opened up like that, and the lever arm, it would be nailed down in the holes so that you know, we couldn't escape, or we couldn't shout for any help if we were in trouble, because we'd get regular beatings and things. And so we were in effect locked in our bedrooms most nights, and that was normal at the time. It wasn't until I started getting older and having a more independent way of thinking that I realised, God, this is so wrong.
Hello and welcome to Autopedia Live. I'm Chris Douglas. My guest today is an English author of 20 books. She's a novelist, poet, journalist, editor, and screenwriter. She's been a weekly headline reviewer at BBC WN 95.6 FM radio, and lately a guest of conversationallive.com, radio from Mississippi, hosted by Cyrus Webb. What a pleasure to have you on the show. Please welcome.
My pleasure to be here.
Dawn, TG.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
What a pleasure to have you. Your books are unbelievable. You're an amazing writer. You read books from the time you were very small.
Yes, definitely. It's always been a great...
When did you start writing?
Do you know, I started writing when I was about 9 years old. I started writing short stories as a means of escape at the time, to suit the situation I was living in at the time. So at a very early age, I started reading stories, and this was following a great love of reading Enid Blyton books and the famous five, you know, all those beautiful stories. And so I'd write little short stories similar. And then about the same time, I graduated to poetry, and poetry, it was like a therapy for me. It was a way of me being able to be true to myself in real time, you know. When you're living a situation as I was back then, you need some form of escape. It's important, and poetry was that form of escape for me. So I could pour out my heart and my feelings, but in the form of poetry, which made sense to me, and it was all very cathartic. It was almost like a release in some way. And it kind of turned into a bit of a poetry journal, which I continued writing all the way through my teen life. And I've eventually, years later, you know, I've published several poetry books.
Terrific. Your books are in embroidery, poetry, prose, romance, suspense, drama. You have any happiness. Every word of it is a heartbeat. I started reading your book, and as I was saying to you before, it's just a page turner. It's unbelievably beautiful. What triggers your feelings?
What triggers my feelings? Do you know, this is a really good question. I think a lot of things can trigger my feelings. It could be simply a song I haven't heard for a long time. It might spark a memory, and then that memory obviously consumes me, and suddenly I'll feel something, and then from that feeling I'm like, oh wow, and I start writing things down, and it turns into a seed, and that seed, it sparks an idea, and the idea turns into a chapter, and before you know it, I've written a book. There's one book that I've written and it's called Broken Wings, and I a few years ago, and it's a beautiful story. It's heart-wrenching. There's a lot of drama, and there's a lot of real life in my stories. They're not just all happy ever afters, although they have a great conclusion, but people will lose their legs, or if they're soldiers, they might get blown up and stuff like that. But it's based on real events that have happened. And this story, Broken Wings, part of it was based on a true story, but also part of it was a dream. I had this dream one night. I remember I woke up and I was writing down like crazy. And I was thinking, gosh, that'd be an amazing story. I have to write this. And it didn't take me long. I think that was the one book that I wrote in the quickest time, because I just had it all mapped out in my head, and I think within 3 months I'd written, sent it off for editing, and had it published within 3 months, and that's quite fast. And but yes, I knew somebody who was in Afghanistan who died, and who'd got blown up by an IED bomb, and it was a terrible situation. And then I'd had this dream, and I just kind of developed this story, Broken Wings, and that's how Broken Wings was born, because I've written quite a lot of military romance as well as contemporary and romantic suspense as well.
What do you enjoy writing most, poetry or short stories, when you started?
When I first started writing as a child.
Yeah.
When I first started writing as a child, I wrote fantasy. I don't write fantasy, never written fantasy or published any fantasy. But when I was young, when I was 9, I used to write my short stories, always fantasy, and something that would take me away on a carpet in the sky or something like that. I took myself all around the world in these short stories. And imagined, what these countries I'd never been to were like. And I'd always have a buddy with me as well. And there was always, a little dog or some form of animals. An absolute animal lover all my life. But mainly it would be a dog, But I would travel all around the world in my short stories. And the joy, the pure joy I would get from writing them. And I never showed them to anybody. I never read them to anybody. They were just my personal thing that gave me an awful lot of joy. But yes, they were always fantasy. They would always be about, and they would always be happy and amazing and, fantastical, grand sort of thing, what every child, the kind of things childs dream about. Very Narnia-like, if you've ever watched Narnia, they'd be very fantastical and Narnia-like, and everything will be beautiful, and the clothes and the gowns, and oh yes, my short stories were definitely fantasy. And I think, like I said, they were kind of my beautiful escape, so to speak. So I spent more time as a child, I think, living in my made up worlds than I did in reality. So I had a very, very imaginative mind from a very, very young age, and I thank God that I did as well.
You and Charles Dickens have one thing in common.
We do.
What is it?
I think Charles Dickens, he was a big advocate for the poor children, and I think he did a lot for children who didn't have anything, and he was a working class man. And he had a lot of children. He had a great deal of children himself. When I think about Charles Dickens, I have no idea how he managed to write all those amazing stories that he did with all those children that he had. So I loved Charles Dickens. I liked the stories that he wrote because they felt real to me. I had a connection with them. There were so many amazing stories. And I connected to them because I felt like some of those children he wrote about, the poor children in children's homes, or, well, it wasn't children's homes, it was the workhouse, the stories. And I just, wow, that's me, and I connected with that, his style of writing. And when I discovered Charles Dickens, and while I was reading him and I was researching him, and I realized what he did for the poor children within his community, I just had the utmost respect and thought, wow, he's incredible. Yeah.
You had a very traumatic childhood.
I did.
Can you take me there?
Well, for those that don't know me or haven't read Amelia's story, the Amelia trilogy, actually, I've kind of written my life story as the events unfold, right up to almost up to date, to be honest. Life was very, very hard. The cover of Amelia's story bears two children, two little children holding hands. They're 2 or 3 years old, and they're walking down the lane in between two cornfields. And that is an image from that picture on that book is actually the image from my memory of that particular, moment in that time. Brother. Yes, for me and my brother. And where that picture, that memory of that picture came from was we were living in North Wales at the time, and in a very, 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 very sort of poor council estate. And they didn't have central heating then. There was, there was a coal fire, and the coal man would come round once a week and he'd deliver coal. But there was rats and everything. I remember rats being in the bedroom, and oh my goodness, I can't even begin to tell you some of the things we lived with, but rats was one of them from time to time. But we were so poor that my mother, and it was very, I must mention this as well, the winters in North Wales in those times, 30 years ago, the snow would be up to your knees for months. And it was so cold, and it would be backing up to the back door. Well, the house where we lived was an old coal miners' terraced house run by the council. And we had a tiny little back garden, more like a courtyard or something. And then you go out the back gate, but you're on a dirt track. And past that dirt track, you've got a big cornfield, and it's all farmers' land. And we used to be sent out with a basket or a carrier bag, and we'd be sent to go up the lane, up the tractor's sort of path, into the field after dusk, and collect the old swedes and turnips, I'm not kidding, that the farmer threw out for the sheep. And we'd have to collect as many as we could, because they obviously had lots of bad bits and all sorts, put them in, and then we'd take them home. And there was a lady down the road that had a vegetable garden. And, I'm saying this on TV, it's so embarrassing, but it's the way it was normal back then. I was like, I was so young then. I must have been 4 or 5. And the peas would come from her garden without her permission, sadly. I'm so sorry. And the turnips and the Swedes would come from the farmer's field, and then we'd give them to our mother, and she would literally skin them, cut out all the bad bits, pop them in a stew, and we'd have that for dinner that night. Sometimes we'd live on that for weeks, with the odd potato put in and all that kind of thing. So it does, when I think about this now, I have a 12-year-old daughter. She has the best life. She has the childhood. She has the most amazing childhood, and she's doing really well, and she's just so happy. And I always swore, when I had children, I wanted to give them the childhood I never had. So she's got the best life ever, and she's really benefiting from that. But when I look back to my childhood, sometimes I just think, wow, but really, did I really live through that? And how did I survive that? And
you're tortured.
Yeah, and obviously, you've read the book, so my mom was a bit of, she was a bit of a sociopath, to be honest. And
I started reading. I'm sorry to interrupt. I started reading the book, and I thought I was taking some Stephen King's type of story.
Yeah,
Unbelievable.
it is quite horrific. It is the things that she put us through was really, really bad. You know, the punishments were terrible, and our bedroom doors at home, they were always bolted from the outside. They had great big, you know, those great big black industrial bolts were always put on the doors on the outside. And when we were put into our bedrooms at night time, there'd be a potty put in there, and we weren't allowed to make a sound. Even the windows would be nailed down shut, you know, the old things that opened up like that, and the lever arm, it would be nailed down in the holes so that you know, we couldn't escape, or we couldn't shout for any help if we were in trouble, because we'd get regular beatings and things. And so we were in effect locked in our bedrooms most nights, and that was normal at the time. It wasn't until I started getting older and having a more independent way of thinking that I realized, God, this is so wrong. You know, the punishments for the littlest things, we don't have to look at our mother the wrong way. And if she didn't like the way we looked at her, we'd have a beating. You know, it was that delicate. So we were always treading on eggshells. So like children do, what we would do, me and my brother, we learned to assess when one of her moods, or we call them episodes, was coming on. And bear in mind, we were only 5 and 6, and you know, so that kind of age at that time, we learned how to navigate our mother's moods to avoid a beating. And when we knew one was coming on, what we would do is we'd do everything to appease her. You know, we'd pick up things that might be lying on the floor, and we would, you know, do anything we could just to keep her happy, rub her feet, anything, so that she wouldn't lash out. And, you know, it kind of worked a lot of the time. It did save us from, you know, a good beating from time to time. But sometimes, sadly, it didn't. But that's the way it was. You can't choose your family, you can't choose your parents, you don't know what family you're going to be born into. It's kind of like the lottery, and you know, you have to make the best of that situation. And my brother, he was a lot emotionally weaker than I was, because I was the older one. I was always looking out for the next younger one, and at the time it was just me and my brother, and then when my other 2 siblings come along, I was looking out for them. So I would always step in rather than, if my mum was on a rampage, you know, getting rolling pins or the dog chain and started lashing out, I would be the one who'd jump in and take the beatings for them, because they were just too tiny. And my one sister, is a terrible situation. She was born with cerebral palsy and disabled with one leg shorter than the other. So she had splints put on her legs to make, and she had these big scars from her ankle right up to behind her knee. And then she'd have these splints, you know, to try and level out each leg. So she was in these splints for years. And having to navigate, you know, your mother's moods, and you've got this vulnerable sister, and you're trying to, you know, keep everything sane and calm, and you know, it was exhausting. It was absolutely exhausting. You know, you'd sleep with one eye open, and you know, if I heard one of my sisters crying, I couldn't get out the door, but I'd be like, it's okay, be quiet, and I'll see you in the morning, just shh. And I'd be talking them down, because I didn't want Mom, who would be downstairs, to be disturbed from her TV program, because we'd all get it then. So it was a very, very difficult situation. And my disabled sister, a brilliant brain, there's nothing wrong, nothing disabled about brain, perfect brain, you know, very bright, very clever, such a beautiful, lovely girl. And I remember we were so opposite, because she had lovely, gorgeous blonde hair, right down to her waist, and she was absolutely beautiful. And I had jet black hair, because obviously me and my brother were from my mother's first marriage, and my 2 sisters, half sisters, were from my mother's second marriage. Yeah, it was an awful situation. And there were times when I felt despair, when I didn't feel that I could carry on, and you know, I'd run away sometimes, but then I'd feel guilty because I'd left my siblings behind, and I'd go back. It is really, really hard. And I still look back now and I think, well, everything that I write now, my poetry for certain, I think all the experiences and emotions and pain and grief and all my childhood angst, you know, it does come out in my poetry. My poetry is real, it's raw, and everything within my poetry has been experienced by myself. Sometimes, you know, I'll write about all sorts of different situations, other people's situations, or, you know, about this girl or this person. They're fictional, but their situation's real, and I will have experienced that at some point in my life, so I can write about it with real heart, and it comes from the depths of my soul, and I know what I'm writing about. I'm good with pain. When it comes to writing, one thing my childhood has done for me, it's given me a great career, because there's nothing like sort of a traumatic situation and pain and angst and suffering to a writer. It's kind of given me something to channel it. You know, I could channel all that into my words, and my words became, you know, my pen is my sword. You know, my pen is definitely my sword. And I wrote a quote. I write a lot of quotes as well. And I don't, was it this year or last year? Last year, I think, I published a book of 300 quotes. Each one of these quotes came from all from my life, different experiences. And one of those quotes was, I pen my words to bear my soul, to free my spirit, to make me whole. And, you know, and no truer words could be spoken about me. If I'm really honest, that encapsulates all that I am and all that my writing is. And even in my fictional stories, I've written a lot of fictional stories, romances and dramas and all sorts. And there's a little piece of me in every protagonist in all my stories.
Yeah,
for sure.
And the reader could feel it.
Yeah,
that is the beauty of it.
Yeah, and I think when people can feel a genuine, I think readers know, and I know this actually because a lot of my readers do contact me. I get a lot of messages from all around the world, and especially about Amelia's story, which was my first book. I'll tell you something about Amelia's story actually. Do you know it was never meant to be published, and it's my most successful book? It's bizarre.
That was a question coming, by the way.
Yeah, I was never meant to publish Amelia's story. It was a story I'd been writing my memoirs for years, actually. I'd been chronologically, you know, various events in my life. And I'd even gone to visit there's a department of records in England where for children who've been under the state care system, and under certain sections, you know, you have to be under the state care's sort of guidance until you're a certain age. All your records from various children's homes and everything else is kept in a central system, and it's available for you only to access once you become an adult up for about 70 years. So when I was in my 20s, I got in contact with this records department. I knew there'd be lots of stuff I didn't know as well that would come out, because obviously, you know, when you're a child, you only see things from your perspective and what's happening in front of you. But you don't know everything else that's happened behind you and behind the scenes, and what's caused this situation, whatever. This is all the stuff that I learned when I went to the records department, and they put me in this room. And the really weird part of this whole department was it was called Bestford House. Now, Bestford House used to be a children's home, and it was a children's home that I was in for a couple of years, but it was now the records department. So I had a bit of a battle with this, because I hadn't been back to any children's home at this point. I hadn't revisited anything for, you know, therapy or just to sort of put to bed old ghosts, so to speak. And I was sitting there thinking, wow. So in order to get my records and view them all, there was boxes and boxes of them, because we were in care most of our life in very many children's homes. I had to go back to one of these children's homes. It wasn't the worst one. It wasn't too bad, Bestford House, to be honest. It was one of the nicer ones, state-run ones. But I had to go back there. So I remember getting the train I was in my 20s. I was living in Birmingham then, and I got the train to Shrewsbury. And I was met by one of the, I asked one of the people who was running, one of the administrators, how do I get from the train station to Bestford House? Because I couldn't remember. And they says, oh, no, don't worry about that. We'll come and pick you up, which I thought was really, really nice of them. And they picked me up, and the minute we went up the street and I saw Bestford House, it was like, oh, God, the feeling. It was as if somebody had punched me in the chest. It really did. And I suddenly felt so overwhelmed with emotion, because suddenly I wasn't me anymore, an adult. I was a young girl, vulnerable and scared, and I was being driven. It was like I'd just been taken back in time, and I was reliving a certain moment, you know, driving up that sort of pathway and entering the great big wooden doors, and not a great deal had changed apart from all the bedrooms upstairs had been turned into these, you know, functional offices filled with filing cabinets of all these different children's records from over the years. So anyway, they were so good to me. They made me coffee, and they gave me a little room where there was a photocopier and a printer. And suddenly all these boxes started coming in. You know, these two young girls were bringing in all these boxes. And I said, are they all for me? And she said, I'm afraid so. She says, there's quite a story there. I went, oh my goodness, I was expecting just a few files. And there was boxes and boxes. And they were no good to anybody. They were no use to anybody. We weren't allowed to take them, but I was allowed to photocopy what I wanted. So I photocopied so much, which helped me with writing Amelia's story, because there was things that I discovered about myself, and even if it's possible, even worse things about what happened to us as children, you know, all sorts of things. Where we got drugged most nights with my mum's sleeping pills just to keep us quiet so she could have, you know, and all these sorts of things I didn't know about. And it was absolutely, oh gosh, to say it was a shock, it was unbelievable. And I spent all day going through these files and reading all these reports that all these people I'd never heard of had written about me. And I found that really, really strange, because I just thought, how do I not know these people, but they know so much about me? And they've written so much about me, like, you know, it just felt really odd. I couldn't connect with that, but obviously I wouldn't have done, because like I said, children see what's in front of them, who's in front of them, what's around them, their immediate state of living, I guess. So I'd photocopied everything and got the train back home. That was some journey, Chris, that train journey back home with all these files. And I did cry my heart out that night, surrounded with all these files, and I had a glass of wine, and I just thought, wow. And I didn't know what to do with them. What order do I put them in? Where do I start? Well, of course, you start with the earliest year you can find, and that's how I worked through them, because there were so many, and I worked through every file until it was all in some sort of order that I could make sense of, and read all the reports. I contacted the NSPCC, because we were under the protection of the NSPCC for quite some time as well. And I needed their permission for certain things as well for my book. So it suddenly became this great project, and it became an obsessive mission then to suddenly find out everything, piece everything together. You know, why did they separate us siblings? It did so much damage. Why weren't we allowed a phone call? Was there something more that we didn't know? So many questions and answers. And I basically pieced everything together like a jigsaw over a 10-year period, and still finding things out years and years later, until by this time I was well into my 30s. I'd bought my own house, my first house. I'd bought my own house. I was about 28, 29, a beautiful grade 2 listed property. It was a dream home I'd always wanted, you know, the wooden beams, the original wooden beams, a classic little English sort of townhouse, and in an old coaching town, sorry. And I remember thinking, oh my God, I own this house. I couldn't believe I owned this house. You know, I worked many jobs and worked hard and saved all my money. And then I got the keys to this house. It was practically derelict, if I'm honest. It wasn't perfect. I couldn't have afforded it if it had all been done. It needed a lot of work. It took 5 years to renovate it from the inside out. And I did it on a very, very tight budget with a lot of help from some really, really generous handy guys in the local town and friends and so forth. And it was my little dream place. And I felt very, very proud. And I remember when I first got the keys, I ran around and I was holding the key saying, oh my God, I own a house. And I couldn't believe it. And I was just thinking, wow, what you can achieve when you put your mind to it. So that was one ticked off the list, you know. And I was very happy in that house, and I was still writing my notes from when I was in care and piecing everything together. And I had various relationships. Some failed, you know, some were good. And then we just, you know, like you do until you find Mr. Right. And eventually when I was ready to settle down, I just knew that I was ready to settle down. And I met my husband at work. I was working for this property company, huge property company in Bryn Place in Birmingham, beautiful area where all the banking systems are, all the banking companies are. And I was working in accounts, and he was an accountant there, and we just clicked, and we've been together ever since. That was about 14, 15 years ago. Yeah, and we had a daughter 12 years ago called Lilia. It was her birthday on New Year's Day, so it's a special day as well, so double celebration. She's an amazing bright child, beautiful. And
it's on the cover of your
when
book.
when I got pregnant with my daughter, that was when I knew I had to write this as a book properly. And I started penning my book. I thought Lilia needs to know, Lilia's my daughter, she needs to understand my journey through my life, and when she's 18 plus, because I won't let her read it until she's past the age of 18, because of the content, obviously. And I wanted her to understand my journey through life and then help her appreciate the life that she's had more so. And it was just going to be written for her, and I was writing it in book form. It was just going to be for her, but I then changed my mind, and after speaking to some very close sort of allies and friends, and I gave them a draft, and they read the story and says, Dawn, you have to publish this book. This book would be an inspiration to so many people. And I remember feeling so nervous and thinking, oh my God, who would want to read this story? I remember thinking it's not that special, just so many people out there have had much worse time than I've had, and they really have. So to me, I just thought, well, who'd want to read this? It's only people who know me would be interested in reading this. So it never occurred to me in a million years that when I published it, it would be the success that it is today. And you know, it's been all around the world. You know, I can't tell you how many times that Amelia's story in the trilogy has been a bestseller in Australia, Canada, India, the UK, the USA, everywhere. You know, it's been unbelievable. And that book led me to my agent, Sarah at Hirschman Writes. And it's a USA agent, not a UK agent. And they got me my Audible deal with audible.com, part of Amazon. And they landed me this amazing deal. And so the whole series was put on Audible, and all the cost was obviously carried by them, which is an amazing thing to get that contract. So yes, not wanting to publish it and then to publishing it with nerves, and I didn't even promote it that much because I was scared of what people would say about the story. I was scared of people's reactions, or I wasn't confident when I did publish it that people would understand my journey, because I had written it purposely for my daughter. But when I saw the reaction and I realized how many people had been in a similar situation and how many people it inspired, it blew my mind. It truly did. You know, I know it's helped a lot of people over the last 10 years, and it's helped them to fulfill their dreams. You know, one young girl, she was in her teens when she read it. She's in her late 20s now. Because of my book, she went to university to study social care, used my book in her dissertation as reference in her dissertation, and passed, and is now doing for children what she wanted people in her position to do for her and the likes of me. And I found that absolutely incredible. So even for just that one person, to know that it has reached people in ways and helped them to change their life, and or given them hope. I think hope is the key word, because that's what's missing from a lot of people in those situations, or who don't move forward with their life when they become adults, and they want to, but they don't have the confidence. And I think Amelia's story has given quite a few people the confidence to move forward and fulfill their dreams, because if I can do it, really, anybody can do it.
I see it as a motion picture.
Yeah.
Have you thought of, really? I mean, have you thought of writing the screenplay for it?
Well, funny you should say that, actually, Chris, because that's what I'm actually doing with it. I've set in motion the draft screenplay for Amelia's story. So that was a whole new thing for me to learn, because I'm writing the screenplay myself, and screenwriting, it's not easy. And there's so much to learn. But a friend of mine, I've got a lot of friends in the, sort of in the author world, in the writing world, and screenwriter friends and so forth. And so I've had lots of advice and tips, and they've pointed me in the right direction, and so I've had a lot of help. So I'm eventually
it's a bit different. You show, you don't tell.
Exactly.
In a screenplay, you have to show everything. You cannot tell anything.
Exactly. You have to. One of the things, Chris, that I have to say about this book is when I wrote it, when I started writing it, I remember saying to my husband, right, if I'm going to do this, if I'm actually going to write this whole book, even if some things portray me badly in other people's eyes, there's boyfriends or whatever like that, things that you do and all that, there are things that, well, some people just think, oh, that's what every teenager does, that's what every young person does. There's others think, oh my God, that's terrible. You have to write the truth.
No.
You have to be truthful.
There's too much twist in there, and there's too much suffering, and that is everybody could feel that. I mean, you turn that page, you feel everything, you go through it. It kept me so long. I mean, I'm not going to put this book down. And
you have to tell the truth.
And I'll order the books from you, actually, on the double, so I can give it to my daughter.
Oh, that's lovely.
This is absolutely.
Thank you.
People learn from this.
Thank you so much. Well, hopefully one day I'll come to the States. I've been to the States before, and next time I visit the States, I will make a point of visiting you, and I can personally sign the books for you.
Oh, absolutely.
Definitely.
Thank you so much. Well, I'll order them from you anyway.
Well, if you order them from me directly and give me your address, then I can sign them. Yeah, absolutely. Yes. I can write a lovely inscription for you.
Everything you write is just a prose and poetry put in one. Even prose becomes poetry. So that's the way it is.
I think
very rare. I think you see writers that use they dress the soul into and put it in writing, and that and it makes you think, and you go further than the words.
Yeah.
And you see the film. You actually see the film. You see you expand from there. You go from there into
a movie. Readers have said that to me before, actually. Yeah, a lot of readers have said that to me before, that they could visualize it as a movie.
Reading your book and starting to read your book, I thought I was abused a bit, and
I think what's tough for some people
with a belt, but Robert did what he did, and I couldn't believe it. It's just too much to.
It is. I think sadly, it's not. It happens more than we think. It happens more than people think. Even now in this day and age, there's so much suffering out there. And take this pandemic, for instance, 2020, 2021. We in England at the moment, in the whole of the UK, actually, we're on full strict national lockdown for the foreseeable, probably till March, I'm guessing. They're having a review at the end of February, but I'm guessing it'll go on till the end of March. And our facts and figures are just awful, the amount of cases and stuff. But what's brought what's been brought to
they put the statistics show more people dying if you put the math together than is the population.
Exactly. And what I've found, because I'm a bit of a current affairs junkie, I like to know what's going on, and I like to keep abreast of the news, and I choose very carefully what I read and what I tend to believe and what I tend to take in. And one thing that has come out of this pandemic has been the very, very worst of people, but also the very, very best of people. Now, moving over to the worst of people, there's a lot of struggling children at the moment in abusive families who are all at the brink because they're enclosed. So there's nowhere to escape. So it's really hard for some children at home right now who are in vulnerable situations. We have like this child hotline in the UK, and it's always been advertised everywhere so that teenagers and children who can have access to a phone, if things get so bad, they can make an anonymous phone call to Child Helpline, and they do their best to advise them and help them and assess the situation. And apparently, it's been off the hook. It's tripled the amount of calls that they're getting. And that, I feel when I hear things like this, when I hear that, I feel it as if it's happening to me really deeply. I do, because I've been there, and I know how they're feeling, and I know they're feeling like, God, this is my life. There's no escape. There's nowhere to run. There's nowhere to go. And you do feel like that, and you believe the threats, and you believe everything that's being told to you, So it's hard to hear that. And the domestic abuse of women as well in terrible marriages, that's been a big thing that's been in our news over here. There's been quite a lot of domestic abuse, and women, I can't even begin to imagine being locked down, with a partner who is, again, systematically beating you, and there's nothing you can do. So there's a lot of bad that's come out of it, but then on the flip side, the amount of wonderful things that has also come out of it. Communities have been brought closer together in ways they haven't been for years. People are knocking on each other's doors again who didn't know neighbours for the last decade, because we live in this fast digital world, and all of a sudden people are sharing, pies and food and checking in on each other, and all these WhatsApp groups, for street WhatsApp groups and everything. We've got one here, and that's been lovely. It's really brought about kind of a pre-war community kind of effort, which I've liked that side of things. But obviously, like I said, with the pandemic again, it brings out the worst and it brings out the best. And it's I think for authors, you couldn't write anything better. I was thinking, how it's been difficult to write the way I normally would write over the last 12 months, because I write in complete silence, unless I'm writing an emotional scene, and then I pick certain types of music to go with that scene, because I kind of method act when I'm writing dramatic scenes, and I method act true to myself. I put myself in a situation I've previously been in to put my character through the ringer, basically, and to write it so true to life that when the reader reads it, they can feel the pain and the angst and the torture of what my character's going through. So I'll have certain music allocated for certain mood situations that I can get myself into the zone and write it with realism. But like I said, I write in complete silence. So my husband's at work normally during the day. He's currently working from home. My daughter's homeschooling, and suddenly there's a busy house all the time. My husband's on conference calls. My daughter's on Google Classroom with her teachers. And I think when I do write, I tend to wait until they're in bed, and I'll write late at night. So I've had to do a bit of a switch around myself, like everybody else. But I still I did manage to write and publish 2 books over the last 12 months. And, you know, I was quite pleased with that, considering the limited time that I had. But it wasn't easy, you know, having to change everything, knowing there's a house full of people and writing in the dead of night, because I am normally a morning person. Everyone goes off to work and they go off to school. I go for a quick walk or a jog, and I come back and I set everything up and I start writing, you know, my current work in progress, whatever it is at that time. And then I finish at 3 o'clock when my daughter is due. You know, I give myself half an hour before my daughter's due home from school. She'll need picking up, or she's being dropped off, and I'll have, you know, a nice snack ready for her, and, you know, whatever. And I turn off my work and I concentrate on my daughter when she comes through the door. So yeah, I think it's been a really difficult time, but it's also given us lots of room to sort of widen our horizons as writers. I mean, what's happened over the last 12 months? It's been an epic, never mind Independence Day with Will Smith. This has been epic. It's been epic. It's just like a Stephen King novel, for sure. You know, I don't think Stephen King could have written it any better. And I keep thinking, if I wake up tomorrow and I walked outside and there was a spaceship, you know, in the sky, I'd be like, now it all makes sense. And I wouldn't be surprised at all. So,
because he has to make it up. Yours is real.
Yeah.
That's
it's absolutely,
you know, so that's the beauty of it. That's the beauty.
I've got the feeling quite a few novels are going to come out about viruses and pandemics over the coming 2 years, I would imagine.
Sad, very sad. It's very sad that I think they are taking advantage of the situation, and this is happening globally.
Yeah, definitely. It is happening.
I mean, it's a new world order. That's what it is.
Definitely. I mean, no one could have predicted what happened in 2020, and I think everybody.
If you were into it and search for,
there were signs a few months before.
Many,
probably from the September 2019, wasn't it? If I recall, I've been reading up about this, to be honest, and I think there was talk, and the word was going around, and there was signs leading up to it that
David
were ignored.
Rockefeller wrote a book years ago.
Yeah,
talking about 50 years back. Saying that the world population should be reduced to 800 million. And this is happening. This is happening now.
Yeah, and wasn't that the book that was written in the 80s? Is that?
Yeah, I'll send that to you.
You must do. I'd like to read that, because I think you know, there has been one circling, and I keep thinking I must read that.
I have over anything you need. I have over 16,000 books in.
Really? Is that you've got your own huge library then?
Right. So anything you need, goodness. But I'll send these things to you. Very interesting.
Wonderful.
And it's all there. I mean, it's for us to see.
Well, it's funny, you know.
It's in the inscriptions and the money and the all the occult signs and all that. It's very interesting.
Yeah, I do. I must admit, I do read a lot of sort of true, you know, non-fiction books. I'm quite fascinated by the things that I don't understand, and if I don't understand things that are happening, going on around me, then I will seek out as much information as I can to alleviate that lack of understanding. I've always been a bit of a knowledge junkie, current affairs junkie. I like whatever's going on in the world. I'm kind of on it, and I'm tracing information, seeing, well, why is that happening, and why aren't they doing anything about this? And funny enough, you know, not about 6 months before the pandemic hit the world and closed the whole world down, which I still can't get my head around that's happened. You know, I read George Orwell for the second time. Read it before. I think it was George Orwell, 1984. Very, very compelling read. And when you think that book was written, 1946, 1947, and his mindset was there. He'd read that book, he wrote that book, all that in his mind, and it was pre 1950, just after the war, just after the
Yeah, but
Second World War.
he was an MI6 agent.
Yeah, and
So he must have known something
it was almost like
from the world agenda. That's what it is.
He must have had sort of some sort of intel or info that, because what he wrote 50, 60 odd years ago has almost come to pass, like a prophecy. It's bizarre. So yes, George Orwell's 1984 fascinated me and led me on to other sort of similar readings, and I love the intelligent minds of
that
people.
and the Animal Farm. It's explaining
Animal Farm.
It's written with so much substrat and beautiful, absolutely
Definitely.
gorgeous. And you could see it on the following. All the communism followed up in Eastern Europe, and it was given away.
Yeah,
it was at Yalta and all that. So.
Definitely, and it's quite fascinating. I think the minds of the minds of geniuses have always fascinated me, and I believe that for somebody, for George Orwell to be able to write something like that was so way before his time, he was a genius. When you read the works of Einstein and other greats, it's absolutely fascinating, and it totally blows my mind. And I think my love of literature, I'm constantly reading. I'm always reading something. I think it was inevitable from a very young age, when I was reading biographies and memoirs from the age of 9. It was inevitable. I think that was my path in life. And I think back then, I kind of knew that, maybe subconsciously, but I knew that. And I've never lost my thirst for a good read, but I really do enjoy non-fiction. The older I've got, the more I'm reading non-fiction, and the more I want to learn about everything possible, to be honest, and have that knowledge base. And knowledge is key, and knowledge is understanding. And the more knowledge you have, the more things make sense to you. So, I'm a big advocate of reading is key.
Yeah, great writers have something about
definitely
writing nonfiction. It's an art as well, because they don't write it journalistically. You don't write like a comment in a journal, someone an article. It's a different type of language.
It's definitely a different form of writing, and
it's a different language altogether. It speaks
totally different language.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally different language altogether. I found that when I completed my Amelia books and went to non-fiction, it was kind of the natural next step, because I was a natural storyteller before I'd written my Amelia's series. It was a natural, and a progression I found came with ease, and I don't think I have the same, everybody has a structure. Everyone has a writing structure, a way they write. And I think I do tend to write I fly by the seat of my pants, if I'm honest.
So you don't write the plot first and then you go by the plot. In other words, schematic. You're like me. You're just writing, and whatever happens.
I just write.
You don't even know what's going to happen in a novel.
Yeah.
If it doesn't relate to you, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And sometimes the characters.
Yeah,
the characters take on.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, the characters take on a form of their own.
And it's absolutely fascinating.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I don't know what they're going to do until I could be halfway through the book, and suddenly I find myself in this, and I think, oh, and it takes a completely different turn to what I thought it might have done. It's almost like it can kind of write itself as you start writing. The book kind of start writes itself. You don't always have control on which way your story is going to go.
The story takes control of you. It's like you are connected to the universal conscience.
It is 100%. I think if I don't plot too much, I have an idea, and it's like it grows from a seed. But once I have an idea, It's almost like making a movie in my head. I don't know how else to explain it. It's almost like a movie unfolding in my head.
It's like we used to play when we were kids. You start playing and you start believing that you are some type of a character. You go into the play and you say, let's do this, let's do that. And it develops from there. Actually.
It's exactly that. It's exactly that. And then I start method acting in my head.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Most of these schematics, and people say, well, you have to write it down and you have to, and they show you how to, you know, if people like, I don't know, Hemingway or Mark Twain or would have gone to school to learn how to write, they would have been themselves. They would not be themselves.
No, they wouldn't have been themselves. And sometimes, you know,
because your voice. It's your voice.
Yeah, it's your voice, not a voice that you've been trained to use. And I think sometimes those are the best voices. I like to feel the realness of somebody, you know, flow out through their fingertips and into their story. And I always can tell if something's been, what's the word? I call it confined writing. I can tell when I'm reading a book if it's confined to me, and it's been too structured or too regimented is probably a better word to make sense of what I'm kind of not executing very well. So if you're writing naturally and it's free flow writing, I can tell if a book's generally been free flow or it's been, you know, too structured and too confined. I can always tell when I'm reading a book and I'm reading it and I just think, and I just can pick it out, and I know what I like to read and what I don't like to read. And I do like natural writers. I think that's the word.
Because it doesn't have the jumps. It does not have that jumpy, you know, the explosion. You go from one to another, which is not actually just not actually permitted in certain. If you follow the rules, you get off the grid.
Get off the train track.
Off the grid,
and just definitely get off that train track and run through the fields with your hair blowing in the winds and just go.
Nature is much more beautiful. Yeah.
It definitely. I fly through life like that, actually, Chris. That's kind of another mantra, you know. I just, like I said, I tend to fly by the seat of my pants. And if something feels right, I go with it. And if I get an idea, I just start writing. And, you know, I know when something works and when it doesn't, because there's always sadness and happiness in my stories. So I'll write stories that'd be quite real life, like, you know, my characters can get ill, they can have a brain tumor, their whole life is turned upside down. And if I can make myself cry afterwards when I'm reading a book in certain parts where I'm expecting the reader to shed a tear or two, I know that I've kind of captured the essence of what I'm trying to relay on the page. And I think that is really, really important. You know, you can't fake emotion. And if you get it right and you draw on your own experience and draw on emotions that you've been through yourself when you're writing certain situations, it will be real on the page and it will be real for the person reading it. And I think that's really, really important. So I don't think I would have been a completely different writer had I have been a trained one, because I'm not a trained writer. I've learned from scratch the whole publishing industry. You know, I do all my own marketing and promoting for the most part on my self-published books, because I'm kind of a hybrid author. I have self-published books and I have traditionally published books. And, you know, I do everything for myself. I do everything myself. And it is a lot of hard work. And, you know, it takes up a lot of time. But when you're passionate about something, really, really super passionate about something, nothing can stop you. But had I have been I never went to university. I'm self-trained in everything. And when I look, you know, think about it sometimes, would I be the same writer I am today had I gone to university and I had been taught a different way of writing? Because I wouldn't be the same writer I am today. The books, I would still have books published. Maybe I'd still have the same 20 books published, but they would be different stories completely. They would be written differently. And I kind of like the way I write. and I know where it comes from, and I understand my own mind, and it's not come from somebody else's ear, and I must be doing something right because people buy them and they like them, and I could do with selling a few more, to be fair. But it's, you know, I haven't done half bad, really, considering I'm self-taught and I haven't been to university, and I've done it off my own back.
University only gives you a
guide,
license for a profession. That's about it. Most people who go to university, they just forget right there. It depends if you go to study arts, literary arts and stuff like that. That's a different. But they'll transform you. It depends, because sometimes it's the inner self that calls voice, out. And no matter what they do to you, that should be. But it's
there anyway.
It's tricky. Then you'd always have that in the back of your
absolutely.
Mind. You have this. I think well, if you don't have the schematic, and if you don't have any, if you are absolutely free like a bird, you could go in any direction you want, and that's the right thing.
Yeah.
And that's
I think with storytelling, I think storytelling is something. A good storyteller, you can either tell a story or you can't. No amount of preparation or training, I think, can make you a great writer. I think storytelling is a natural thing. All the authors I know, they're natural storytellers. They they write amazing stories, and a lot of them are self-taught. They were just natural storytellers who, are fulfilling their dreams, and they're amazing. And I find that it's one of those things like an athlete, a trained athlete. Say somebody like Usain Bolt as an example. Now look, he's a phenomenon, and he's just speed, isn't he? But he always was. It was a natural thing for him as a child. That was a natural thing. He wasn't taught that. He was a natural runner. It was, inevitable he was going to be one of the world's greatest runners. And I think so. Just some things you are naturally born with, and some things you can be taught. Universities are amazing. I mean, there was a time, when I just thought, should I go to university and do this and do this? But all the things I needed to do for what I do, I did outside of the university sort of complex, and I went to night school and went to business school, and I got myself all my O levels and all my education, everything. Once I left the care system, I had to pay for it and go to night school and 2 or 3 jobs, all that kind of thing. But I stopped when it came to the university thing. I think I'd had enough by then. But university is an amazing thing. It gives people choices and challenges they wouldn't otherwise have. But when it comes to writing a story, I'm not convinced with that section of it. I do believe you're either a storyteller or you're not. You can write a good story or you can't. I think people can teach you how to write well. University can teach you how to write well, use the right tools, give you the right guidance, but they can't write a story for you.
Yeah, the guidance is needed, but you learn that as you go by. However, I think that every writer, after you write your book and you just go writing, forget about the grammar, forget about anything else. I mean, you go as you build it up.
Yeah.
At the end is gonna go to the editor anyway.
That's what I'm saying.
You cannot edit it yourself. You can.
You have to have an editor.
But you have to have an editor, because otherwise you can't see. Your mind flies through everything.
Nobody. The worst. Yeah, exactly. The worst thing an author can do is edit their own book and publish it, because you don't see your own mistakes. You might pick certain things up. But I know, as an author as well, the times I've sent my book, I've got some great editors. And when I've sent my book to my editor, fourth, fifth, sixth draft down the line. You know, it's ready. Okay, it's going, and it comes back with all the red pen, and I look at it and I just think,
absolutely.
oh my God, how did I not see that? They have a different vision. They look at your novel through a completely different lens to what you do. You're looking at it from your story's point of view. Yes, it can be well written. I'm very good with English, actually. I'm very good. My grammar, my English is very, very good. But I'm not an editor. Writers write stories. Editors polish those stories for publication.
Yes, because even if it's very good, even if you're fantastic, even if you're an editor yourself, sometimes you go back on the same sentence and change stuff.
Yeah.
And you do it so fast, you're not going to realize what's happening. Because they look at what? Punctuation, spelling, sentence.
The odd comma. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I've missed things out so many
Story
times.
Flow and everything, the plot, maybe, how they consider it plot.
It's everything,
They may take a third chapter and put it first.
Yeah, they pick up everything you like, comma splice, syntax. They pick up everything you just miss in the excitement of writing your story. You know, and quite often, I mean, I do so many drafts until I think in my head, until I can't find anything else, and until I believe it's perfect.
Let them find
then I send it. Then you send it to your editor, and it comes back, and you're like, whoa. How did that happen? And I was like, oh my God, and I'm sending emails. I'm so sorry. Oh my goodness, I'm so embarrassed. And then, you know, it goes back and forth until it's perfect. But editors are there for a reason, and authors are there for a reason. And they both have two completely different jobs. One is to share a story, and the other one is to polish that story. So one can't be without the other. And publishing a book, I've always said, is a team effort. Your cover designers, your formatters, you have your editors, your beta readers, your proofreaders, a whole team of people help make your little masterpiece perfect for publishing. And it is a collective effort. You know, I've always said I never take full credit for, you know, any book that I write, because it's not down to just me. It is down to the great cover that grabs readers in the first place, not designed by me. You know, the editor who's just done an amazing job, or you know, with plot scenes, or they find the hole you may have missed or something, because it does happen. We writers know it does happen. We're not perfect. There's just a whole team of people that produce a book for publication. So I do quite like to, you know, honor them when I'm publishing a book and mention them in my book. And you know, I couldn't have done this without this in my acknowledgements, without this person. It's important to recognize that they're a part of something that you've created, and keeps you grounded as well. And I think it's important to be grounded and realize that nobody can do anything alone. Everything we do, we need help, and we have somebody there helping us along. So, yeah.
Do you prefer writing poetry or prose?
Poetry is something completely different to my writing novels. I love writing novels. Poetry's been with me, obviously, through my darkest times in my life, as we've spoken about, since I was a child. And it's very cathartic for me. And it's also
your crutches.
Yeah, poetry is my crutches. That's very good. I'm going to use that. Poetry is my crutches, absolutely 100%. I couldn't live without poetry. I write so much poetry for myself. I have a lot of unpublished poetry, probably 500 or so poems I've not actually published. But when it comes to my head, I have to write it down. I see a situation, or I can be in a melancholy mood, or I might be feeling a bit down, or, you know, any sort of situation, and suddenly I'll start writing. I write best when I'm down or a bit depressed or not feeling great.
Are you influenced by any other poet?
Oh my God. I like William Blake, Sylvia Plath.
I saw Thomas Hardy in there.
Yeah, Thomas Hardy. Oh gosh, there's so many. Actually a great poem.
Byron, Keats and all that.
Yeah,
I mean,
Lord
it's
Byron,
so much.
Keats.
It's so much in there.
And there's one particular poem that I really love listening to. I actually like listening to it when I think it's Brian Blessed or another actor who reads the poem. It's on YouTube. I often tune in sometimes just if I'm in that sort of mood, and I'll listen to it. It's called The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe. He was a very dark poet, and it's called The Raven. It's quite a long poem. I would definitely recommend reading it. Reading it and then listen to it being read. He's the actor who's reading out this poem encapsulates the mood and the essence of every single word. It's so dark and so deep, and I just find it quite beautiful, and it always sends shivers down my spine. And so every once in a while I will pop onto YouTube and I'll just sit there and listen to it. It's quite a beautiful poem by Edgar Allan Poe, and he's like I said, he's another great writer. Sometimes I think he was misunderstood, but he was a very dark writer, and I think he wrote what was in his mind, like poets tend to do. All my poetry comes from inside here. It's my mood, it's my moment, it's my sadness, my torture, my parenting. It's everything that's inside of me comes out onto the page into my poetry in one form or another. And I've written several books now. Abyss is quite a dark poetry book that I wrote, and there's 3 sections to that poetry book, and it's kind of, you're in a dark state of depression, so the poetry is all about being in the center, in the abyss of depression, how it affects you. So there's a lot of poetry sort of in the right in the center of this cyclone of depression. But then the next section is dealing with that depression, accepting the darkness, because it comes and goes. So it's like learning to live with the darkness, accepting it and respecting it. And then the last section is coming through the darkness, coming out of the abyss and seeing the light. So the poetry takes different depths all the way through the book. And that was a really, really, it's quite a dark poetry book, really, to be honest. But a lot of that pain and angst, obviously, it's come from all different sections of my life, but mainly from how I felt when I was younger. And it was, and it's kind of all poured out in that book. But then there's my military poetry book. I've always been fascinated with war, the military, and my grandfathers were in World War II, and a previous boyfriend was in the RAF and in Afghanistan, and I've got that kind of connection. And the World War II, it fascinated me morbidly, I suppose, because it was such a horrible war for so many people, and I couldn't believe how awful people suffered. Look at Anne Frank. I read her diary, and all these other people who suffered at the hands of of Hitler, who was an abhorrent leader and did some awful things to awful people, or ordered awful things, the camps, everything. I couldn't quite believe it, and it really affected me emotionally. And I had to read everything in sight. I became quite obsessed. I had to. Why would they do that? What kind of human being would do that sort of thing to another human being? It was absolutely awful. Yeah. So, it's I wrote a lot of poetry on military poetry called Military Boots, and it is just literally a poetry book about soldiers, about their plight, about the war in Afghanistan. I read up a lot about that, and about IEDs and people suffering and the innocents caught in the crossfire, and how soldiers have to come
Have
back
a
to civilized.
pocketbook edition for them to carry it on to.
Yeah, I
Wherever
should.
they go.
I should.
So
Definitely.
I do not see wars vanishing any.
No, I don't. I
Going
mean,
on.
gosh, what's going on? You know, you live in America, so obviously the feeling in America has been very on tenterhooks at the moment with what's going on. Obviously, with the you know, upcoming inauguration with Biden and Trump, and what happened in Capitol Hill yesterday. That was, you know, that was shocking. It just feels like it's a very strange feeling, because you've got the pandemic and then you've got civil unrest everywhere. And, you know, sometimes you wake up and the news is on and you see and you think, God, it feels like the world's on the brink of some kind of war like we've never seen before.
That was provoked. Obviously, someone is working at dividing us.
Yes,
so
and
that was provoked. People are people, so they react according to their beliefs. And
absolutely, no, absolutely.
They do not want a neo-Marxism to come about.
Yeah.
And it seems that this is what's going on.
Absolutely.
On a global scale.
Yeah, definitely. I know it is definitely. I mean, you know, when you look around and you see what's going on, and do you know, the funny thing is, here's a classic. This is a conversation I've had a lot with my friends over the last 12 months. When the pandemic began, you know, the whole world was closed down. Literally, the whole world the doors were shut, businesses were shut, weren't allowed to go. Us here and in the UK, during the first lockdown, we were only allowed out of our house for 1 hour a day for exercise. And, you know, you weren't allowed to meet with groups of people outside or anything. You could only go with people from your household for 1 hour. And then you look around the rest of the world, Australia and all these islands around the world, and Africa and all these other countries that went into lockdown, one after the other, after the other, after the other. Not one situation in the whole of human history has there ever been a situation where the whole world has been locked down. World War I, World War II, you know.
Black Plague was terrible. I don't see anybody falling on the street and dying of this.
No, it's really, it is. I can see why it's so controversial for so many people. You know, it's I find it unbelievable that I still can't believe sometimes that, you know, we're in a pandemic. I believe the pandemic, but nothing in the history of us as a collective human being, the whole race on the planet, there's never been one thing that shut down the whole world for the same reason all at once. And I don't know if I'll ever be able to get my head around that, to be honest. I find it absolutely crazy, and it doesn't
it's only one switch.
So many things.
It's only one switch.
It's almost like
from
it doesn't make it
and light. That's it.
Yeah.
And
definitely.
somebody has control of the switch.
Yeah, it does feel like that, doesn't it? It does feel like that. But here we are, and